Welcome back to Baltimore Backyards. I'm Chris Swain. If you haven't watched part one of our conversation with Maren Gimple, the Foreman Branch Bird Observatory Center for Environment and Society at Washington College in Chestertown, be sure to jump back in the playlist to catch that. In this episode, we continue to learn about their program and celebrating 350,000th bird banding. Maryland's got to be an interesting state to do this in, because you can get, I know painted buntings show up and people freak out. You get a western tanager and yep. So what are some of the, is there a benefit, or what are some of the birds that you've actually handled that you're like, why are you here?
I think Maryland is a really great state for birds. Part of it is that we are sort of in the middle of their north-south movement.
Mm-hmm.
If you get too far south, you just have attrition. Like, not every bird's going to make it during migration. And so some of them are sort of slowly dying off for various reasons along their journey. So we still have a really big volume of birds moving through here. And then Maryland has such diverse habitats. You have, like coastal birds and mountain birds and everything in between. And bird banding is a way a lot of times to document species that could otherwise go unnoticed. A lot of birds are found just by birders, but think of all the birds that just nobody sees. So in addition to that, dovekey recently, earlier this fall, flamingos turned up in all kinds of weird states in the eastern half of the country, and they just also got sucked up in a tropical storm, and they sort of try not to fight it, and then the storm dissipates and they drop out, and then you've got like flamingos in Ohio. Like, weird stuff happens. But yeah, we've banded quite a few species that were unexpected. About 15 years ago, we banded a calliope hummingbird, which is a hummingbird sort of the western half of the continent. We have banded two ash-throated flycatchers, which look similar to the great crested flycatcher, which is normally found in Maryland. Painted buntings do turn up. The really cool bird we had this fall was something called a western flycatcher, and it was the first one we'd ever banded. Looks very similar to some of the eastern flycatchers, like an Acadian flycatcher. And that's actually a species that's so cryptic that you have to take a lot of measurements in the hand to sort of rule out some of the other species. But yeah, those are exciting things that when you tell people, you have them in Maryland, people are like, really? And you're like, no, yeah, like sometimes it's weather that blows birds off course. There was a lot of concern this fall about the Canadian wildfires and sort of how that was going to disrupt or affect fall migration. We did have some migrants that were especially early this fall, and I suspect it was related to those fires, but we don't really have a way of knowing for sure. And people do sometimes ask, what's the craziest bird we've caught in our nets? And we did catch once a blue Quaker parrot. And it turns out it had escaped from a house just sort of 5 miles down the road. And we took its picture and we put it on Facebook. It was like the best use of social media ever. And we said, local people of Chestertown, is someone missing a parrot? And the parrot was reunited with its family. So that was a pretty unusual one to find. From a distance, you're sort of walking up and you see something blue, and that parrot is a shade of blue that's not really any of our regular birds. It's more of a baby blue. And so we were like, what is this? And then we got up to it and we were like, you look around for the hidden cameras. You're like, who's punking us with this parrot?
Yeah.
But it just escaped its home.
I imagine every so often something just incredibly unusual happens like that, but that's got to be a little bit of excitement.
Well, they're probably lucky we caught it, because what are the odds that parrot would have found its way home? It probably wouldn't have. So,
right. And then not done well in this environment. So
yeah.
What are you guys working on project-wise? Obviously, I'm sure the banding takes up a lot of time, but what other research projects go on here in the state that help some of these birds that you've learned that have been applied to science to help some of these animals?
One really cool emerging, really large project across the continent actually is called MOTUS, MOTUS, and it's a network of passive receiver stations. So in the old days, anybody that's seen one of these old wildlife documentaries where they put a radio tag on a moose or something, and somebody had to go hiking through the mountains carrying this receiver that's the size of a car battery. They have to hold up a big antenna, and listen for the beeps. And so now there are these passive receiver stations that can just listen for these tagged birds as they fly over. So we host one of those on the college property here outside of Chestertown, and it picks up birds that anybody has tagged. And it's actually not just birds. They make the tags small enough now that they can put them on bats, and some of the really big dragonflies are big enough to have them. And so researchers can deploy these tags, and then the stations will track these animals as they migrate. So we have the receiver station. That's all public data. People can go to the website for MODIS. You can zoom in on their interactive map. You can pick the tower receiver station that's closest to your home, and you can see what organisms have flown over. So that's really cool. And currently we are putting out radio tags on eastern towhees. So eastern towhees, if people don't know, are one of the biggest sparrows. They count as a sparrow. Black and orange and white, feed on the ground. It's sort of a common backyard bird. Have you had them under your feeding station at the station yet?
We haven't had them here, but that is one of my mother's favorite bird, with the tail flash to get that pop of color. Yep. And their eye colors. They're incredible looking. I mean, you know when you see it.
Right now we're deploying those tags for a graduate student at the University of Delaware who's looking at their winter movements. So there's all kinds of things you can study about birds. I mean, we're really focused on migration, but other people are just interested in what are they doing in the winter? Are they holding a territory? Are they just sort of wandering? Are they the same place the whole time? And so we're putting out tags right now for this graduate student who is interested in sort of the winter ecology of some of these species. There's breeding projects. I use undergraduate students from Washington College to help me and my co-investigator study field sparrows in the summer. Field sparrows are a pretty common bird, but they are in decline. They use sort of overgrown grasslands or early shrubby, scrubby habitats, which are, both of those habitats are sort of in decline. I think a lot of people think about grasslands and then think about trees, and everything in between is sort of messy looking, or maybe they just think it's been abandoned, but that's a really important habitat for a lot of species. And so we're studying field sparrows in the summer. And on that project, we're actually looking at whether older birds with more experience are better parents. And I'll put better in air quotes. So we have a population out there of birds that we've been banding for over a decade. So we know how old the birds are. They come back. Most of them come back every summer. So there are birds that we know are 7 years old, and there are birds we know are 2 years old. So we're looking at whether older birds with more experience then can build better nests and fledge more chicks. So there's endless really cool things you can research about birds. And there was this big study maybe 2 years ago with a whole bunch of scientists from all kinds of organizations. And they've estimated that over 1 billion, with a B, 1 billion birds have disappeared from our landscapes in the last, I think it was 50 years. So the threats to birds are just countless. There's habitat loss, there's outdoor cats, there's bad weather, right? Some of the birds that get swept up in hurricanes don't make it and perish. And so birds hitting buildings and glass is a big problem. So all kinds of things homeowners can do, but all kinds of things that scientists are still trying to sort of document. Like with bird banding, with us, we're starting our 27th season of migration banding this March. And a lot of that kind of bird banding that we're doing is sort of just taking a census every season of how many birds there are of what kind. And you can't document what you've lost if you don't know what you have. So it's sort of important work just to sort of, take attendance every season, like who's still here? Great, still going.
That's part 2 of our conversation with Marin. Be sure to check out next week's episode as we continue our conversation on Baltimore Backyards. If you've enjoyed that episode of Baltimore Backyards, you can check out more episodes by clicking this box down here. And while you're at it, go ahead and tap that circle to subscribe to WMAR 2 News for great content posted every day.